Have you ever really analyzed the Ten Commandments? We view, many of us, the Ten Commandments as the voice of God. Now, this is the Old Testament God, not God speaking to us through Jesus or another religion's prophet. But if we are to believe that the Ten Commandments is actually the voice of God, it is momentous. It's mind-blowing that we have, in theory, recorded history of God, which deserves a lot of attention, you would think. And the words of God should not be changed or altered in any way if they're the words of God. Now, we have human intervention in the form of Moses being the recipient of these words and the transmuter of these words. And so there is some level of human intervention involved. To the extent that these are, in fact, the words of God, and they are commandments that will last in eternity, one would imagine that they would be very, very carefully crafted. Now, we may not understand the context. Maybe these Ten Commandments were only meant for the particular time and place in which they were given. So let's give the benefit of the doubt that perhaps that they are. But if you analyze these Ten Commandments, you wonder why there wasn't a more interesting crafting of these rules. And you wonder whether or not, in fact, politics played a role in the human intervention that was involved with the arguable handing down of these rules. Now, the context of these Ten Commandments being articulated by Moses was potential open revolt against the theocratic underpinnings of the community which he was leading. Folks were not following as diligently as was desired the precepts upon which Moses was trying to administer them. And it's interesting that the first several of the commandments were not anything more than effectively political doctrine. Why do I say that? Well, in Exodus, the words were as follows: I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Okay, well, that's interesting. Why did that need to be articulated in that way? The current revision of the Ten Commandments is as follows: I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt not have strange gods before me. The entire discussion of Egypt and the land of slavery is now missing from many of the renditions of the Ten Commandments that you find. That's dangerous, because the more over the years and centuries that words change, they lose their meaning and context in impact. Who knows how many changes occurred in the Ten Commandments through the years since they were articulated by Moses, and how many changes occurred even in the brief time period that they were brought down. So why is it important for God to say, "You shall have no other gods before me"? Well, and why is it critical for God to say, "I am the Lord your God"? Why is this the first effective set of commandments, rather than more arguably emphatic commandments of not killing each other, not committing murder? It would seem that an argument can be made that whoever brought down the Ten Commandments was attempting to instill in his followers a political doctrine that the God that I have told you about, the God that brought you out of Egypt, that's the one we should be paying attention to. That is the God, not any other God that's out there. It would seem that a more concise articulation by God was possible here, and something that would be a bit less self-serving. In other words, I am God, and I am giving you these commandments. And Moses is my deliverer. It just seems like the all-powerful can perhaps draft a commandment more emphatically, more concisely, and less laden with the discussion of whether or not the God was the one that brought you out of Egypt, and any discussion of slavery. It seems like excessive language for the concept, which is maybe the reason that current renditions leave that out. Now, in Exodus, there's also this commandment: "You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on earth below, or in the waters below." That is a strange, anti-artistic commandment, but maybe we'll put it in the context. "You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God." Now, let's, stay there for a moment. None of that discussion is in current renditions of the Ten Commandments. We need to ask why. We need to ask why an all-perfect being would have effectively the character trait of jealousy, which we all attempt to avoid. These are serious questions, and this is almost entirely redundant. The first set of discussion in the Ten Commandments of "I'm the Lord your God, and you shall have no other gods before me." Apparently, God decided that we needed to pursue a more emphatic discussion, that you shouldn't be making images, and "I'm jealous." And then the Ten Commandments go on to say, "Punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments." So we've got jealousy and punishment if you create images and you bow down to them. Isn't it enough to say, I'm the true God, and that's enough? Then it goes on, the commandments go on to, at least in Exodus, to say, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. So here's more Old Testament punishing God type of stuff. And we haven't even gotten to the commandments that should be intending to control our behavior in a manner that is, frankly, very simply put, as I will articulate in a moment. But this entire first discussion is focused on the self-centered idea of God being God. Well, we get it. You're God. But let's get to the commandments. So I'm going to go now and turn to what would be a simple commandment. One simple commandment would have been in the New Testament, the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, I would advocate that that's not a good rule. The golden rule is a bad rule. If you're a masochist, for example, and you like to be whipped and beaten, you shouldn't be able to subjectively say that's a good thing. The Steve rule, as I've articulated in the past, is don't assume that you have the right to interfere without someone's consent in their life. The Steve rule solves all problems and solves almost all of the other commandments. The Steve rule prohibits thou shalt. The Steve rule addresses the most critical of the commandments. Now, there's some other commandments here that are redundant. Thou shalt not commit, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Presumably, it would suffice to say that it's improper to interfere with the marital relationship that you're not in. Now, that having been said, what if that other marital relationship, the husband is abusing the wife, and the wife wants to get out of that relationship and join you in a much more loving and rich relationship? Is that acceptable? One would imagine that would be the case. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Okay, so truth is a good thing. But you would imagine that truth is a good thing generally, that we would endeavor not to lie. Are there white lie exceptions that would be permissible? Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. Well, frankly, why isn't that covered by thou shalt not steal? Now, that's in some of the modern renditions of the Ten Commandments. The older edition is thou shalt not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Again, one would imagine that if these were the words of God, that God would understand that these words were going to endure through time, and it would not be so contextually associated with oxes or donkeys, and you would focus on oxes or donkeys. What is the point of this conversation? The point of this conversation is that it's important for us to analyze history. It's critically important for us to analyze religious history. Religious history has the ability potentially to guide us in our current behavior. If in fact these are the words of God, then we must take them with utmost seriousness. It is our job to analyze these words, understand them, make sure that there was not undue human intervention in communicating these words to us. I will let you be the judge of whether further analysis is required.